So what I'd like to do now is actually play a video from the Executive Director of the SMA Healthcare Foundation, Ms. Jennifer Secor. And I'm going to play that video now, and she's going to be welcoming everybody.
Good morning, and welcome to our Who is Jay mental health webinar series presented by the SMA Healthcare Foundation. The foundation enthusiastically supports SMA Healthcare in its mission to improve lives by providing exceptional substance abuse and mental health services. Each May, the foundation hosts a day-long mental health symposium in Daytona Beach, Florida, which includes various educational breakout sessions for professionals in the field and for members in the community. This year, due to COVID-19, just like everything else, our event was canceled. However, we asked some of our scheduled speakers if they would be with us on Fridays this month, and we thank them for agreeing to participate. For those of you watching today who have attended our symposium in the past, please mark your calendars for next year's event, which will be held May 13th, 2021. These webinars could not be made possible without the support of numerous sponsors and the Jay's Hope Fund. This fund was created in remembrance of Jay Ashby by his family in order to provide mental health and suicide awareness education in our communities. On behalf of our board of directors and staff, we hope that you enjoy today's webinar, and we hope you will join us for the other webinars in this series. Thank you.
All right, so hopefully everyone got a chance to see that video. If you didn't, we do have the recording, so you'll have a chance to view it there as well. And at this point, I would like to tell you a little bit about our speaker today. Dr. Nekeshia Hammond is the former president of the Florida Psychological Association and the host of the BWE Mental Health Moment. Dr. Hammond is a renowned speaker, best-selling author, and psychologist. She is also the owner of Hammond Psychology and Associate, and she has enjoyed traveling the country speaking to groups about mental health issues. As an advocate for mental health services, especially for youth and families, she's authored the book, The Practical Guide to Raising Emotionally Healthy Children, and the Amazon International bestseller, ADHD Explained, What Every Parent Needs to Know. Dr. Hammond is honored to consult with the media to increase public education about mental health, and she has been featured on NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, and a variety of magazines and radio shows throughout the country. She is the recipient of the President's Volunteer Service Award in 2012, FPA What a Woman Award 2014, APA Early Achievement Award 2015, TBBJ Up and Comers Award 2015, I Am Lee, the Living Education Everyday Award in 2017, and FPA Distinguished Psychologist Award 2018. So on behalf of SMA Healthcare Foundation, it is my pleasure to introduce and turn this presentation over to Dr. Nekeshia Hammond.
Hi everyone, and welcome. I am super delighted to have each and every one of you here today for today's presentation. Before I get started, I want to take a quick moment to thank the sponsors for this webinar, SMA Healthcare Foundation, Jay's Hope Fund, Advent Health, Brown & Brown Insurance, EM Pros, Simpkins Family Foundation, SMA Healthcare, and FPL. So I want to give just a huge thank you again to the sponsors for making this webinar available to the community. And I also want to thank you for joining today, taking time out of your busy schedule to get this information, in particular about how we can help our youth, especially with everything that's happening right now in the world. So thanks for joining. So today, really the objective, there's a couple of objectives, and the first one being discussing and understanding adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs. The second thing is I'm going to briefly discuss youth brain development, because the reality is, even though sometimes we think that youth are mini adults, they are absolutely not, or they may think that as well, but they are not, because their brains aren't even functioning in the way that an adult brain is functioning. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. The third thing, the exciting thing I think, is really about communicating, especially after trauma, especially after tragedy, and everything that youth are experiencing right now. How do you communicate with them? So we'll go over that. And then the last part are just some interventions. So what are some solutions? How can you, whether you're listening to this and you're a parent, a caregiver, a mental health professional, you work in the schools, or however you interact with youth in your life, there are solutions and there are ways to increase their resiliency. So we'll get into that as well. So thank you so much for that beautiful introduction earlier. I'm Dr. Nekeshia Hammond, a psychologist, author, and speaker. I do a lot of work with the media. I'm honored to do that because of the need for public education, frankly, especially with mental health and all of the myths. So I spend a lot of my time consulting with the media and speaking, along with running a private practice in the Brandon area, which is near Tampa in Florida. And again, I want to really thank the sponsors, because public education is so important and so vital right now, especially for our youth. Aside from my professional life, I am a mom of, I would say, the most amazing 8-year-old little boy on the planet that I've met. And also I've been married for the past 12 years. So I love spending time with family and friends, and I've been in Florida for quite a long time now. So I'm honored to be here with you today, as I mentioned. So the first thing to understand when it comes to youth is something called adverse childhood experiences. And this is something that there was a study done back in 1995, 1997. So it has really, it's been a while, but a pretty huge study with Kaiser and CDC. And they looked at specific experiences that could potentially be traumatic and how it can affect you in your life and in your adulthood, frankly, and what are the links and what are the connections. And this is really important to understand, because understanding what youth go through, it's not just about their childhood or their teen years, but understanding that the impact can be really long-lasting. But the good thing about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, is that it's absolutely preventable. So I'm going to go through a couple of the examples. Essentially, it's a 10-question questionnaire, and you get a score from 0 to 10. And you can actually take it yourself if you'd like. It's online. You can just Google Adverse Childhood Experiences Questionnaire. There's 10 questions, as I mentioned. But it looks at a couple of different categories. So the first category is abuse. And I know that a lot of times when it comes to trauma, you may immediately think of abuse. But there's a lot of different categories of trauma, and we'll get more into that. But one of the things they look at is physically, has there been abuse, or emotionally, has there been abuse, sexually, has there been abuse, which can have potential difficult consequences. But the other part to this that a lot of people don't often think about is the neglect. So it's one thing to have physical abuse or emotional abuse, but the neglectful part can be really impactful on our youth. So just because youth may have clothing and they may have shelter, doesn't necessarily mean that they're not neglected. So as if they have no bonding experience, if they have no one that's caring about them, that's giving them a hug, that's emotionally pouring into them, that could cause a lot of physical and mental health problems later on. So these are some of the things that the study has looked at when it comes to neglect, as well as physical neglect too. I've unfortunately at the beginning of my career, heard just horrific, I wouldn't even go into details because it's so horrific, stories of neglect and abuse at a shelter home that I used to work at in Hillsborough County. I mean, horrific. So things that you probably have heard on the news, maybe times 10, as far as the neglect and the abuse. And it really does, what's interesting about seeing those kids is I saw a group of kids that, in one group, just horrific outcomes. Mental health, they were struggling. Physical health, they were not doing well. Academically, they were not doing well. They were really, really having a difficult time. But then I saw another group of kids in similar difficult situations that they had gone through. And they were resilient, and they were thriving, and they were doing well. And at the end of this presentation, we'll get into some of the interventions, but it was because they had the appropriate interventions in their life to make that happen with every negative situation that you can think of that was happening to them. The third part of ACEs is what's called household dysfunction. So those are things like having a relative that's in jail or prison, or parents getting divorced or separated, or sometimes there's children that are dealing with alcoholic family members that takes a toll on them. So all of these sorts of things are what contribute to, when you hear the word ACEs or the term ACEs, all of these things contribute to that. So one of the things the CDC, this is from the CDC, this next graphic here, but one of the things the CDC and Kaiser, when they did this study, looked at was how do these traumatic events affect adulthood? Because these are events that have to happen somewhere between birth and 17 years old. But after that, when you're an adult, how does that impact you? And some of the things they found, as you see on this graphic, were horrific. I mean, this is from, again, abuse or neglect or what they call household dysfunction. So you're looking at things like, for some kids, unfortunately, that experience a TBI, let's say a traumatic brain injury, and how devastating that could be into adulthood. Or physically experiencing cancer, diabetes, HIV, higher risk for STDs, higher risk for using alcohol. There's a category talking about education, occupation, and income, because it also can affect that, relationships, inability to function, if you will, on the job with different supervisors. So this really has some significant impact. But what I do want to say to this, because I know this looks like doom and gloom, but the positive of it is that there are ways to really change the narrative, if you will. And there are ways to still save kids, even though, as I mentioned, man, I can think of so many kids that I've met with, on paper, the things that they have gone through were so horrific. But putting the proper things in place, what we call protective factors in psychology, you have the risk factors and the protective factors, but putting those things into place is something that we can do as a community, and I say we, as a community, to really think about saving youth. So the next part I want to delve into briefly is brain development. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, the thing about youth is that they absolutely positively cannot reason, cannot understand things, cannot make decisions like we do as adults, even if they think they can, especially for our teens. I know I've met many teens that feel like they're an adult, but at 12, 13, 14 years old, their brain does not have the capacity to fully process the things that happen. So one of the parts of the brain, it's called the amygdala, and that's responsible for how we process emotions. And as you can imagine right now, with so many things that are happening in the world, especially with kids, they are on social media. We know that. So it's not like, well, I don't want to date myself too much, but back in my day, when I would decide, which usually was not the case, watching the evening news or not. That's not the world we live in anymore. Kids have tablets, they have phones, they have their computers, they have access to social media, they have access to news. So they see what's happening in the world. And thinking of how their amygdala is not fully formed at that time, and the emotions that they have against perceived threats. So with anything that's happening right now, with the coronavirus, which we know has had just horrific impact for some youth, with raising their level of anxiety, with having them be depressed. I've met many kids that are really struggling right now with anxiety, right? These are because of the way they're processing it is because of the amygdala. For example, they see a threat. There's a jack-o'-lantern in the picture. Hopefully it's not too threatening, to many youth, but you get the idea. They see a threat, they have to process it, visually process it. It goes into your brain, and then a behavior results. But here's the thing when it comes to trauma, when you have chronic trauma, your brain goes into overload and you start to think that everything is a threat. So a lot of kids that are experiencing trauma, which again comes in many different forms, they start to almost go into overdrive. They start to be hypervigilant in class. When I've met so many youth that teachers have said, I don't know what's going on with this kid. They're acting out. They're not doing their schoolwork. They're not doing their homework. They don't seem motivated. Well, really, it's because they were dealing with trauma. They're so, their arousal level is just so up with everything happening around them. It could be a book that drops on the ground. It could be, a noise in class, and it's triggering flashbacks of a traumatic event that may have happened to them. So this is really something to keep in mind. And again, we're talking about youth. So we're talking about kids. We're talking about teens. That cannot fully understand or process how we do as adults. But the amygdala is a part of the brain, again, that is really is responsible for emotions and our response to that, which is not the same as an adult. The next part that is very different, especially again for teens, the prefrontal cortex. So that's literally in the front of your brain. That's responsible for attention. It's responsible for planning and executive functioning, if you will, which is planning and organizing, and how impulsive you are sometimes. And again, for teens, it's not even fully developed yet. For some people, it's not fully developed into like early 20s. So again, even in college ages, when you're wondering why some college students are making the decisions they're making, I'm not making an excuse for them, but I'm just letting you know that it's because their brains cannot fully understand what it is that they're experiencing. And these things are important, particularly if you work with youth, to really understand from a biological standpoint that, again, we're working with a time period or a developmental time period where some kids are absolutely not able to fully function the way that we expect them to, sometimes unrealistically expect them to. And, which is a whole nother presentation, and we're not even talking about in this presentation youth that necessarily have depression, anxiety, ADHD, learning issues, and all sorts of other things on top of their brain development, which is a whole nother topic, but which also greatly impacts how they're going to perform in the classroom, in the community, at home, with their friends. So it really impacts them overall. So with all that being said, understanding and knowing about adverse childhood experiences, understanding that youth's brains are different structurally, from the beginning, and then again experiencing trauma and experiencing tragedy, how in the world are we supposed to speak to them, right? Because it can be delicate. It should be delicate, I hope, many conversations. So the first thing I want you to think about for you, and this is not, I don't want a textbook definition, but when you think about trauma, like what is trauma? What is the first thing that comes to mind to you? And there's no right or wrong answer, but what is trauma, right? And so, again, not textbook definition, but really thinking about, there's a lot of things that I think we would agree as a society of what can potentially be very traumatic. So on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, most people would agree potentially physical abuse or sexual abuse or neglect, or having someone with a parent that may be an alcoholic. Those sorts of things we may say, yes, we understand that. But the other part of trauma to understand is that there's what's called personal trauma, meaning to that child, there's something that happened to them that is so traumatic, it completely affects their functioning. But it's not necessarily something that was on the ACEs questionnaire, if you will. So one of the examples is most recently the Black Panther character Chadwick Boseman, he recently passed away. they were kids, I'm sure you saw it on the internet, so distraught from that. Like that was he was their hero. They were, really into superheroes. There were kids I saw, it went viral. They were having funerals, in their houses because of this event. And again, it's not on the scale, right? The ACEs scale, obviously. But nonetheless, for this child, there are kids that cannot function because that happened. And a lot of other things that happen to youth that are traumatic to them. And I tell you this because I really want you to understand that sometimes we discredit things that are traumatic specifically to a child, that we are like, why would you be traumatized over that? But for them, it shuts down their world. So I want to remind you of that. And I've also met a lot of youth that years later, after something has happened, has mentioned in my office that, it could be a natural disaster, someone passed away, or some other major change in their life was still hurting them. They were still healing from that. And their parents were really surprised. And they were like, but that happened like 5 years ago or something like that. But we don't necessarily know unless we're asking the questions sometimes of our youth what it is that is affecting them. Because some youth, as we know, are not talkative. So they don't necessarily tell us how they're feeling. So here's a couple of things to really think about when we're talking about trauma-informed communication, right? The first thing is listening, which I know that it seems like a simple concept to listen to a child, but it can be really, really difficult sometimes, especially if you're a parent or a caregiver, or maybe you're a coach or a teacher or whatever capacity that you're in, because there's some things that kids will say and you'll be like, I can't believe that actually happened. Or again, like the superhero example, why would you be affected by that? But this kid is falling apart right now, right? So it's so important to really listen, to do your best to listen without judgment, to do your best to hear them out in what they're saying. I've had a gazillion, I feel like, kids that have told me that they were trying to tell someone something that happened to them, or talking about something that happened in their life, and they stopped what they were saying because they felt that that person was judging them, because the person jumped in right away and wanted to solve the problem, or jumped in right away and had something to say about that. So they stopped and they didn't feel comfortable discussing it any longer. So listening without judgment, fully listening without interrupting is really, really important, especially when it comes to trauma. The other thing is understanding triggers. So for youth, this varies quite a bit depending on what the trauma was. Even right now, with everything happening with the coronavirus, there's a lot of kids that are really, really afraid, understandably, really anxious. Am I going to get the virus? Or maybe they have had someone in their life that has been affected by the virus, or maybe they have had someone that they know that has died from the virus or in the hospital. So there's a lot of different things, and they're very triggered by things with germs, or what do I do and what do I say? They're triggered by social interactions. It's a thing right now, right? This is happening. So understand, and that's just one example, but understanding what triggers are for youth is going to be very important when you're having these conversations. Understanding that maybe for some younger youth that have been in abusive situations by maybe a particular gender, they may not feel comfortable around that particular gender when they're having conversations. So there's a lot of different triggers that are happening right now for youth, which is really, really important to remember. The next part, fight, fright, or freeze, is really, you probably have heard of fight or flight, but there's another component to that, which is freeze. So again, for some kids, when they're discussing the trauma or the tragedy that's happened in their life, they may just shut down. So they may not necessarily move away from that conversation. They may not, well, they could feel afraid as well, but they may be in a situation where they're just really shut down and they're not able to communicate, which is absolutely okay. and expressing to them in that moment right there that it's okay is really, really important. Because again, the major thing I would say for, almost 15 years of working in this field is really doing your best to meet youth where they are at and really expressing to them that you're there for them in whatever capacity, again, as I mentioned, that you served. And even if in that particular moment they can't discuss whatever it was that was traumatic to them, they know that they can come to you again at a later time to talk about it. That's very important. The other major thing, which actually should have been first on the list, is safety. Safety is so critical, especially when we're talking about trauma. The person feeling, physically safe, the youth feeling physically safe, especially emotionally safe to have these discussions is very important. Again, no matter what, if you're in mental health, if you're in the school system, if you're parent, caregiver, or whomever you are watching this right now, safety, if you think about safety, emotional safety especially, with these communications, then you're definitely on the right track. But it's really important to have these heart-to-heart conversations. I would say it's life-saving. I know that sounds pretty strong, but it's almost life-saving also to express to youth that you can be there for them, express to youth that you're checking in with them, because even if they don't want to talk about it, the fact that you said, you know what, I care about you, and I would love to have this discussion when you're ready, I promise you it means a lot, and it goes a far way, because many of our youth that are struggling with self-harm thoughts, or thoughts that they're not good enough, thoughts that they're not pretty enough, that they're not rich enough, that they're not whatever enough, they're not enough. I hear that all the time. The reality is when someone actually shows that they care, it really has an impact. And like I said, it really potentially can be life-saving, because there are kids that are wanting to hurt or kill themselves because of trauma and because no one has talked to them about it and processed it or done some of these steps here to make sure that they're safe as they're talking about these things. So the next part to really think about is some of the interventions, because again, I know that most people, when they hear trauma, they think gloom and doom, and there of course there are hardships, but there's also a lot of things that can be done so that we can help youth to thrive through that. You know as well as I do, numerous people that have had some really traumatic things happen, right? But there's the people that are falling apart, or there's the people that are thriving. So we want our youth to thrive. So we want to say, no, there's not everything can we necessarily prevent. There's a lot we can't prevent. But what we can control is how they're processing it and how they're understanding the trauma that's happened to them. So some of the things to really consider, and if you don't remember anything from this presentation, I hope you remember this slide. The biggest thing to consider is to treat the child as a whole, because a lot of times we get stuck on one particular part for youth. But really we need to be looking at these factors and to treat children as a whole. So keeping in mind for them when it comes to trauma, keeping in mind their physical health. So there are some kids that are 10 years old, but they look like they're about 14, right? Which has an effect on them. It absolutely affects them, because people have way different expectations than they should, because they look so much different than their age, or vice versa. There's kids that are 10 years old and they look like they're 7 years old, which also has an impact on them with their friends, with other kids, other peers, with teachers, with the community. So that's really something to keep in mind, is physical development along with physical health. And how is this child doing? Do they already have risk factors for certain physical conditions, whether it's childhood diabetes or, whatever other physical health conditions that they may be experiencing. The other thing to think about is emotionally. how they're really doing, especially, I know I brought this up a lot, but especially with COVID right now and the impact on that. There are kids that have really had a hard time switching to virtual in the past. Maybe they're still doing virtual, or maybe they're in person, just depending on the situation, but there's some kids that have really struggled with that. There's some kids that have been struggling emotionally right now with seeing what's happening on social media and the racial trauma that may develop because of literally seeing people being killed in videos. Can be highly distressing. So where are kids at with what is happening in the world and what's happening in their personal lives? The other thing to think about is academically how they're doing, which is usually a red flag, especially for kids. So for adults, it's more of thinking about how we do, maybe functioning at work, or how we do in our adult roles. But for kids, how are they doing in school? Are they an A-B student that's now C's, D's, F's? How are they doing with sports, if they're in sports or art or whatever it is that they're doing? How are they doing as far as being productive and functioning? These are really things to consider, especially after trauma. And then really thinking about empathy levels, because it can be a really difficult conversation. These conversations can be really, really difficult. But thinking about your own empathy level when you're having these conversations and trying your best to have patience, because again, trauma comes in many, many different forms. There are things that you may or may not be able to relate to and what this child is telling you, but still really important to have as much empathy as we can. And then the last part is relationships. So this is a really critical component to think of in this child's life, depending again on where they're functioning out, if you will, with relationships. When it comes to their own peer relationships, when it comes to parent or caregiver relationships, relationships within the community, that's a really important area and a red flag to look at. The other part of this is, as a community, if we could really understand, you've heard the term, of course, it takes a village, but really understanding how to change these things that are on the screen here, to change it and to prioritize it, especially for youth. If we could put these things together, prioritize it for youth, mental health, for example, so important. I know I'm a little biased as a psychologist here, talking about mental health and how important it is, but it is critical because, again, there's students that are thriving. Maybe they're thriving physically, they're thriving academically, or they could be a straight A student, which is great, but emotionally, their mental health, they are falling apart and they're struggling, which is very concerning. So taking into account, how does mental health look in your community? If you're a parent watching this, for example, are you checking in with your child and making sure that they're okay? And if they're not, knowing that there's a lot of intervention programs or mental health facilities that can be helpful. If you're maybe working in the schools and thinking about how you can partner with mental health facilities is going to be really, really important. And the other thing is there's a lot of wellness programs that are happening right now with youth, particularly with the schools. They're doing a lot of peer-to-peer counseling, which I'm a huge fan of. Peer-to-peer doesn't work with every situation, obviously, or more severe cases of trauma, but it can be very helpful. Again, when it comes to trauma, there's such a spectrum of things that can happen to youth. It can be very helpful for some of the more milder or minor issues that absolutely affect youth. So, but thinking about those, when you think about how to help youth after trauma, is going to be very important. As well as school culture, because right now there's a lot of conversations, there's a lot of changes happening in education. There's ways to really reduce the risk that children are even traumatized right now, especially with all of the massive changes that are happening. I know that some communities have just done an amazing job just trying to really be like a wraparound for youth. And with all the cancellations of graduation and the changes in the school system and the virtual school, and there's so many other different parts, there's some communities that have done really cool things, I think, to just, again, try to reduce the trauma for youth. There was I don't know, like a drive-by graduation I saw online for like a kindergarten class or something like that. So they didn't have to miss out on the celebration, because kids it's hard for them. The celebrations they've missed out on that they're used to and that sort of thing. So again, thinking about your school culture, and if you're a parent, advocating for this. If you're already in the school system, still advocating on that end, because it's really, really important. Community dialogue, we're obviously doing that today, but having more of these conversations is really, really going to be critical going forward if we're going to work on saving our youth. There's probably 3 more hours worth of information that I would love to tell you. Obviously, I will not be doing that. I'm wrapping up here. But there's a lot of critical conversations that need to be happening. The things that happened that we're witnessing as adults, the COVID-19, we've seen protests this year. We've seen, so many changes, so much loss, so much grief. It's been a little challenging, to say the least. Well, for youth in particular, it's even more challenging for them, because they have to make sense of their world. And they're supposed to be at a stage where they're learning that their world is safe and their world is okay and they can function. And instead, for some youth, they're learning it's scary, and I'm anxious, and I'm nervous, and I'm depressed, and there's no hope. Those are the things that they're telling themselves. So we have to make sure they're not telling themselves that, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that can be happening, but there's ways that they can still have hope and still function and still be okay, which is our responsibility as a community. And the last thing is really about positive relationships, and I always call it the power of connection, because it's hard for me to even express this, but connecting with youth is so important. It's really the number one thing. I'm a huge fan of mentoring programs. Obviously, I'm a fan of mental health and connecting from that standpoint, whomever it can be that is positive for a child. Sometimes it may be in your household, or maybe parent, caregiver, sometimes not, which is fine. But if it's someone through a place of worship, if it's someone in the community, if it's a teacher, a coach, whomever it is, having the positive connections is one of the things that really saves youth. And thinking about the things we talked about earlier, which is the adverse childhood experiences, these are things that, again, can be prevented, but even if they did happen, having these connections, whether it's mental health, whether it's, looking at a child as a whole, whether it's the community, these are what children need to move forward and process through this trauma. And someone to say, you know what, I understand what you've gone through, but here are some ways for you to cope, and you will make it through. And you can still be successful. These are the things that youth need to hear. So that being said, I know there's a lot of information that I've presented today, but what I want to leave you with is that, especially with this year and so much that has happened, there still is a lot of hope for our youth. Again, there's prevention efforts and intervention efforts, which are both very important. I would love to answer some of your questions that you may have. If I don't get to all the questions that you have, please feel free to connect with me on social media. Would absolutely love to answer your questions and stay connected with you.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Hammond. So we're going to give people a chance to actually type in their questions now. We did catch a couple of them during the session. Before we get to questions, I want to just give people a chance. If you want to download a copy of this presentation, you can see it in the center box right there to the right of my video and in between the chat log. Underneath that, we have your request for CEU credit. So if you need to get credit for that, click on that, and that form will appear in your browser. We have the evaluation form for this session, as well as links to register for the next 2 webinars, which we'll be offering, which are all free. So I'm going to put Dr. Hammond here on split screen. And are you ready to start taking some questions?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, so first question comes from Julia Marshall. She asks, do you think it takes longer for people who experience childhood/teenage trauma neglect to complete brain development?
Sometimes. Sometimes it does, yes. It does delay it at times. The trauma, depending on the type of trauma, depending on if it was chronic trauma, is this something that happened one time, is this something that happened multiple times, can actually change the way your brain develops, which is actually pretty scary. But again, the good news is, even if you're an adult, there are things in place that you can use to process that. But when the brain is on this hyper alert system, if you will, like everything's a threat, someone's going to hurt me, someone's going to harm me, and you live in that type of world mentally, it's really challenging. When you think that your supervisor is out to get you, or you can't trust your significant other, or someone else in the community doesn't have your best interests at heart, and you're constantly living like that, which are actually some forms of PTSD, it can be really difficult. So yes, it absolutely can delay some brain development. There's studies that show that, and also there's a lot of studies that show that it can completely change the way your brain develops as well. So great question. Thank you.
All right, we're getting a lot of great comments here, a lot of thank yous.
Yeah.
Someone says, Sheila says, thank you, togetherness, we can be the change the world needs to see. Rebecca says, so much helpful information I'll apply to work, at my work. Okay, here's another question coming in from Tamara. She asks, you mentioned the importance of fostering healthy relationships. What specific strategies would you suggest for teachers to do this? And the community, hopefully youth can be involved in the 2021 summit in May.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So one, I will say, so in my professional experience, I've worked primarily, I used to work in the school system actually, so I worked with teachers too, but most of my work has been with parents. And the stories I've heard from them, from their experience with teachers, kids know when teachers care. They absolutely do. And I love the stories where parents will tell me that teachers have gone above and beyond. I mean, yay. I get excited about that. So I think really what teachers can do within themselves is really to think about, am I going above and beyond? I know right now, it's probably not the year to say this because there's so much happening and so many changes, but have I gone above and beyond for the student, especially for students that are struggling a bit more in whatever area of their life? And am I really doing my best to utilize the resources in the community? Because to your point with the community, I love Big Brothers Big Sisters, for example, but there's a lot of mentoring programs that are very important. That's one way that the community can sort of get involved and foster these healthy relationships. So think about mentoring programs. Think about, if you can, think about to what level have you provided support within the schools? Because some schools, as I mentioned before, do like peer counseling. So kids are getting a lot of support. Some kids just want to talk to other kids and teens about their problems. Like, let's face it, some teens just want to talk to other teens because adults don't understand, which is fine. If it's a milder issue, fine. If that works, we love it. I'm happy that you're supported in that way. So are there peer counseling programs? Are there programs, there's so many that I can think about off the top of my head, but are there programs within the school that are building positive relationships between youth and also positive relationships with other positive role models that are adults? So thinking about it in that way is going to be really, really important. And thank you for your question.
All right, next question comes in from Crystal. Crystal asks, do you think that the childhood trauma can follow them through their entire life into their dying process if they have never dealt or processed it?
Yes, I do. My specialty area is children and teens, but I've seen all ages, and I have seen some much older adults over 70, 80 years old that have not fully processed things that have happened in their childhood, and it has some pretty difficult effects on them still, which is probably why I love working with kids, because the biggest thing is if you can reach youth early, then we're literally preventing so much heartache and pain, to your point that who asked this question, that can impact a person for the rest of their life. And again, I'm talking, I don't know how old the person was, but maybe 75, 80 years old, still having difficulties with trauma that happened in their early childhood years. So it absolutely positively can impact you, but hopefully not if we get to youth early.
All right, next question comes from Casey. Casey asks, have you identified any common or distinct barriers with engagement for adolescents that only acknowledge trauma later in life? For example, working with teens that have spent years without acknowledging their childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, I have. And I've spent some time at different schools, just in different capacities throughout my career, and some schools, I've spent time at the A-rated schools, the F-rated schools, everything in between, but some particular places in particular, just, they really struggle with what I would call like trauma-informed education or trauma-informed approach, meaning we're glossing over, even really as a community, sometimes we do that, maybe unintentionally, just glossing over trauma that happens to kids because kids are not talking about it. So we say, oh, they're fine, they're good, but they've just witnessed something horrific. So they might not be good. Even though they're not saying anything per se, it doesn't mean that they're okay. So I think as a community, that's something that we need to do better, in particular, especially in the schools, that we need to be asking the questions, are you okay? How are you doing? If and when you're ready to talk about this, here we are, and those sorts of things, because then you'll see generally some more conversations coming out of the trauma that's happening with you. But yes, I would absolutely agree with you.
All right, Paula has a question. She says, hi, Dr. Hammond. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us this morning. I was very interested in hearing from you. What has been the most rewarding part of the work that you've done throughout your career?
Oh, I love that question.
From a personal one.
Yeah. I believe the most rewarding part is really knowing, especially with my work with youth, that there are things that when we deal with it in your childhood years, or when whether it's an evaluation or back when I used to do therapy, when we learn how to cope with something and providing them with the tools to be emotionally healthy as they get older, I really feel that that's a gift. Not just myself, but whoever it is that I could teach to, which is why I try to speak so much about mental health. It's so rewarding to know that that's a gift. It's so rewarding when kids are really struggling with self-esteem, for someone to be like, hey, like you're amazing. Like, really, I am? Yes, you are. So I would say that's the most rewarding part of my work, is just knowing that teaching these strategies to get through trauma, low self-esteem, whatever it is, early can really impact their adulthood years. So that's always been and still is very exciting to me.
All right, so getting a lot of great comments here, a lot of positive feedback. Let's see, I'm looking through here. Tamara actually offers a link to the FLDOE website for a resource called Student Voices.
Perfect.
Someone's also looking at how to connect. Is the best way your website or your email?
Yeah, I would say my website, drnekeshiahammond.com, which is also on the slides too. I know it's a little long, but you can email me, you can reach out on social media. I spend a lot of time on social media just because I like to send out a lot of great resources and talk about mental health, especially for youth. So feel free to connect on social media. Feel free to go to my website or email me if you have a question. I'm more than happy to help.
So Dawn has a comment, says, excellent presentation. This is so important to address and see the connection between childhood trauma and the impact it has later in life when it's not addressed.
Mm-hmm.
It's good stuff.
Thank you. Yes.
So I had a question for you. I found it really fascinating when you mentioned the Black Panther story.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that some things don't have to be kind of a personal experience to be traumatic.
Yep.
As a parent or a teacher, how can you recognize what's kind of the everyday incident to your child and what is traumatic? What are the kind of the telltale signs?
Yeah, that's a great question too, especially when it comes to trauma. And one of the things to look for is the change in this child's functioning. So when we really are in tune as parents, as teachers with kids, we have that gut instinct. Like, we can see that things have changed. It could be their mood that's changed. It could be, if you're at home with them, they're sleeping differently, they're eating differently, they're more anxious now, they're really struggling with their grades, and there's a lot of red flags that start to pop up. For some kids it's like 0 to 100, but for some kids, a lot of kids, it's gradual. It's just a little gradual thing. You're like, are you okay? Like, what's going on? I would really say to pay attention to that, though, and don't wait too long for intervention, because unfortunately many, and I know there's a stigma of mental health and all those things, which we're trying to work on, but there are many families that have said, I wish that I had sort of intervened earlier because they saw the red flags early. So I would urge, again, communities, schools or parents or whomever you are watching this, to intervene early. Even if it's the milder interventions, those are okay too. It may not need to be a mental health counselor, but there's something else. And I think someone put something in the chat, like you said, like a resource. But getting them resources early is critical if we're going to save youth. So
we got a interesting comment from Betsy. She says, we never know what a child/youth/student may be dealing with, especially when they walk into our school. Oftentimes our troubled students are the very ones that have experienced most of all the, quote, ACEs. We need to pay close attention to youth triggers. I feel sometimes they are triggered by others if we just pay attention, further problems can be avoided.
That's absolutely, I can't even tell you how true that is. I had a situation some years back where this child, actually I think I was on residency, so it was a while back, but this child was not wanting to do their schoolwork, just head down, shut down. And the teacher was like, I don't understand. He's so defiant. He's not doing his work. What's happening? And as I talked to him, the reason why was because the night before he was hiding in his bathtub because he heard gunshots outside. Like, that was his night before. And then nobody talked to him about it because it was like, just glossed over. And then you go to school the next day and you shut down. So to your point, there's so many things that kids are dealing with. They're dealing with illness of family members. They're dealing with moves that may have been really stressful for them. I work with a lot of military families in the past, and for some kids, even that move is traumatic, it's stressful for them, right? So there's a lot of things, to your point, that we have no idea where kids are going through, which is why, on one of the slides I talked about empathy and just knowing we can't really make too many assumptions, because we don't even know if they had dinner last night, if a kid had dinner last night. If you're a mental health professional or in the schools, we don't really know everything. But it's really important, again, like I said, that they feel supported, and we can support them as much as possible.
All right, Samantha says, great presentation. Thank you, Dr. Hammond. Can you speak briefly on your thoughts about if there are situations in which you believe addressing the trauma after the fact could be more harmful than helpful? For example, if a teen experienced a traumatic event as a child, but is not necessarily seeing issues from that, how do we know when to, quote, push working through the trauma, or when to play a type of wait-and-see strategy?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I would say, really, we have to do our best to meet people where they're at. So can it be harmful sometimes to process trauma as an adult? The short answer to that is yes. It's a complicated answer, of course, but the short answer is yes, it can be, because depending on the type of therapy or whatnot, it can be even more traumatic to bring up and relive old memories, if you will. So the bigger thing I would say to that is to meet someone where they're at, because for some people, it's absolutely the thing that needs to happen to process that trauma and to move past that and understand whatever it is that happened to them, how they can move forward out of that. And for some adults, because we're talking about adults now, it's not the right time. It just really isn't. And I would definitely leave that up to an individual because again, it's hard and not everybody's ready to necessarily address it. So great question.
All right, this is great. We're having people connect in the chat room here. Casey offers from St. Johns County, anybody who would like to connect and continue discussing our community so we can tackle trauma, please email me. So Casey gives the email right there.
Good. Thank you guys. Well, and I'm so excited. Okay, because this is what it's about, like connecting. Gosh, I wish I could like shout from the rooftop all the mental health resources, but what you all are doing, even in this chat, is what is absolutely needed. Like to connect the resources, to share the resources, to share the information for youth. This is how we save them. We have the answers, we have the solutions, but we have to put the pieces together and connect the dots. So thank you guys for doing that. That's awesome.
All right, so we're going to give people a few more minutes to type in any more questions that you have. We did want to make this about an hour, so we're coming up on that. But if you have any burning questions or you just haven't had a chance to type them in, now you can do so. And again, if you want a copy of Dr. Hammond's presentation, it is right to the right of her, just the upper right-hand corner. You can see the audience copy, trauma-informed communication. You can click on that, download that right to your computer. Of course, you'll have to figure out where you saved it on your computer, right? That's, we don't know, but to your downloads folder. So you can do that. Again, if you need CEU credits for this, please make sure you fill the form. You need to do a separate form for each webinar that you attend. So hopefully you've completed one for Dr. Hammond's. We'd also like to get an evaluation form from you. So you can click on that link and just quickly complete an online evaluation. And then lastly, we have 2 more webinars coming up. This is totally free. This is all provided thanks to the sponsors you see in the top banner and by SML Healthcare Foundation, which is organizing all of this. So you can click on those 2 links and go to register for those webinars, and we'd love to see you at them. All right, just got a quick comment here from Samantha, not related to the topic necessarily, but Dr. Hammond, can you give us a quick snapshot of your professional path so far?
Sure, no problem. So I have been in private practice now. I own Hammond Psychology and Associates for almost 12 years, which feels like just yesterday, but it's almost 12 years in private practice. My subspecialty areas are ADHD evaluations, learning disability, gifted testing, PTSD evaluations. In the very beginning of my career, for a couple years, I did therapy, and now solely psychological evaluations while I'm in the office. While I'm not in the office, I spend a lot of time in the community because I'm obviously here with you all today, but just really a huge advocate for public education. So I'm the public education chair for the Florida Psychological Association, and I've been the past president of Florida Psychological Association, and I work on some boards related to youth and making sure we're helping our young adults, and just really making sure to be on social media, providing the resources. I'm trying to practice what I preach, you all, so just sharing those resources. And again, like I said, feel free to jump on and retweet or reshare or whatever it is, whatever platform you're on. So I really spend a lot of my time in public education, if you will, related to mental health, and it's been an honor. I'm honored and humbled to be able to do that, but there's a lot we can do. I know I've said that 12 times, but I'll say it again. There's a lot we can do to save our youth. So thank you for your question.
All right, so we're going to start wrapping things up here. I've kind of gone through all the links several times. We did record this presentation, so we have a video recording of this. We'll be sending that out on Monday to the email address you registered with, so I'll give you a chance to see this. And please make sure you pass the links on for our upcoming webinars. We want to get as big crowds as possible. We want to help as many people as we can with everything happening with COVID and how important mental health is in our schools and in our community. This is something we really want people to take part in. So if you get a chance, please attend. Any parting words, Dr. Hammond?
Thank you all so much for being here again. Thank you to the sponsors again for having this webinar, and thank you so much. I love anyone that's trying to help you, so I love you all. I know I haven't physically met you. I wish it could have been in person, but thank you again for taking the time out of your busy schedule for this. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of resources for youth. And if you need anything at all, please reach out. I am more than happy to help. So thank you.
All right, on behalf of the SMA Healthcare Foundation, thank you everybody for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you, Dr. Hammond.
Thank you.